Alrighty, so we've got our pen and paper. I'm going to write down thoughts as they come up. And we're going to have a conversation, a candid one, about COVID, the vaccines, our personal opinions about them, and the new legislation that's coming up around the vaccine passports.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
Right. So, to start, we're not professionals.
No.
We're just two people who have been witnessing a lot of conversations online, kind of frustrated with them.
Doing some reading of our own.
Reading of our own, because we both had our own kind of like separate journey to the COVID vaccine, and we just kind of wanted to share a little bit about why we chose to get vaccinated, some of the thoughts that we had along the way, and yeah, probably some thoughts that kind of pop up as we talk about it.
We're gonna try and keep this fast and loose.
Yeah, fast and loose, a little bit light, and also the whole reason why we decided to have this conversation is because we have been seeing a lot of content that has been created in the last month or so around COVID, the vaccines, now the passports, and what we've noticed is that a lot of that content is kind of angry.
Mm-hmm.
It really comes from a place of anger, which, understandable. Anger is a result of fear, and people are scared because the last year and a half-ish has been really challenging, and
we're dealing with a subject that's like, it's talking about people's lives. It's
life or
it's
death.
Life and death. So it's understandable that people are really concerned about their well-being and the well-being of their families and their other loved ones that are close to them.
Yeah, it's definitely like an emotionally charged conversation, and our goal is to kind of have that conversation while being really open about our personal perspectives, which is we are pro-vaccine. Like, we have both been we are double vaxxed?
Yeah,
we're double vaxxed.
And we very much believe that anyone who is able to get vaccinated should be vaccinated.
Yes, but we're going to talk about why, and also our goal for this conversation is to make sure that people who have opposing views to us do not feel ostracized by our conversation. They don't feel like we are targeting them, or I'm seeing too much content right now that is kind of like, I believe in vaccines, and anyone who doesn't, you're stupid, you deserve what's coming for you, etc., etc. And it's really angry. My perspective is that all that's going to do is kind of push people who are kind of straddling the line between like, I don't know, maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. It's just going to push people in the opposite direction of where you want them to be. And I think, honestly, like, kindness, openness,
understanding,
and a whole lot of science is the way to get people to move in a direction where communities can be healthier and we can slowly but surely get back to normal.
Suffice to say, if at any point you want to ask us questions about what we believe, why we believe it, if you want Madeline and I to go more in depth into the science, if you want more depth in the socioeconomic parts of it, intersectionality, we're more than happy to talk about that at any time. Just let us know.
Yeah, send us a message. And also, that being said, we've got friends who are on either side of the spectrum, and we've had conversations with some of our friends who've been really nervous to get the vaccine. And we are going to try to approach that conversation with like the same amount of love that we did for our loved ones who were on the fence. That being said, if this conversation here changes your mind about us, then that's okay. Feel free to take a break from our content, to come back later, to not come back later. That's the beauty about online spaces. It's yours.
They are as safe as you want them to be.
Exactly. I'm a true believer that your online space should be yours, and if you are following someone whose content upsets you, please unfollow them. It's not good for your mental health to follow people who make you feel upset. That being said, I do hope that if you like what we're putting out into the universe, if you're someone who has different opinions from us, and you feel like we did a good job talking about our differences, then you'll continue to hang out.
We want to make sure that it's clear we are just talking about different beliefs that we have. We're not talking about whether or not you are a good person for believing in those things.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay, so why don't we talk about kind of our journey to getting vaccinated?
Yeah. So for me, it was pretty straightforward. I am someone who very much basks in science.
Showers in it, just
If there is good
Eats it for
scientific,
breakfast.
if there is good reason to do something from a scientific standpoint, I will probably do it. So my decision was pretty straightforward, and I don't have a lot of risks to consider. I'm a fairly healthy person. I don't have any complex reproductive organs to concern myself with. So it was a fairly straightforward decision to me that I can protect myself, I can protect my family and my community by getting a vaccination.
Yeah, for me, it was a little bit different. I definitely had my hesitations towards the vaccine. I have a background in science, kind of. I did a bachelor's of science in psychology and gender studies. And so when I was originally doing the research on my own, because I wasn't really satisfied with the content that I could find by just like Googling, is the vaccine safe? Like, should I get the vaccine? I found it kind of hard to kind of dig through and find the content that I really wanted, which was, my main concern was the fact that there wasn't any like long-term studies about the vaccine. Because I am heading into, well, I think from like a biological sense, I'm like right in the thick of like reproductive years, and no babies. So I just wanted to make sure that I was being smart about my decision and understanding that I do eventually want to have children, that I wasn't having any risks. And I really feel quite emotional for the women who were pregnant during the thick of COVID. Like, having to make that decision while pregnant, I can't imagine doing it. And my heart goes out to the women who made a decision, and whether that was to not get a vaccine when you potentially wanted one, that you got the vaccine because your doctor told you to and you felt unsure about it, but you know, science was telling you one thing. Like, that whole bit, like, my heart goes out to you.
Irrespective of what you chose, it was a hard decision.
Yeah, and you know, we've heard from people who were pregnant and they were told not to get vaccinated from their medical professionals, and I can't imagine being in that situation. Meanwhile, being bombarded with, you know, get vaccinated from every other place. Like, to the women and the people who are pregnant during COVID and having to make a decision about vaccination, like, wow.
With all of that being said, though, it is the working knowledge now is that if you are pregnant, you should still be vaccinated.
Yes, the CDC has explicitly said that it is safe for pregnant people
to receive
the vaccine. But anyway, so my personal decision to get the vaccine, I needed to take some time to do research on my own, and I eventually came to the decision that it was safe for me to get the vaccine. It wasn't going to affect my reproductive organs. It wasn't going to affect future pregnancies. And I chose to get vaccinated, and we like kind of celebrated it. Yeah. Like, we cheered when we got like our first.
It was a big moment.
And
it's kind of a milestone that we made it through a global pandemic.
Yeah, and it really felt like the first time we as individuals, other than just like wearing a mask and social distancing, that we were able to kind of take a step forward in a way. And there was a lot of elation to that, like just kind of feeling like, okay, like we're finally getting to the end of, you know, this weird time.
A fairly miserable year.
Yeah. So anyways, that was kind of our decision-making process to get vaccinated. And the first vaccine, we like kind of felt, we were like, meh, it felt like a shot. Our arms were sore. It wasn't until our booster shot where we really felt
sick.
Like, holy, that's a lot. But we looked at each other at one point and we're kind of just like, are we gonna die here? Like, is this the end for us?
Yeah, we didn't feel good, but I was still feeling cool because knowing how the vaccine actually works, the reason you're feeling sick isn't because the virus is making you sick. It's just because that's what your immune system is responding to.
Yeah, so Mitchell's gonna quickly like explain the vaccine or like how it works, because for me, when I was thinking about vaccines, I was very much thinking of them in terms of the way a flu shot works, which is they inject like a tiny little portion of like a dumbed down virus so that your body can be like, oh, this is like the flu and here's how you fight it. But the COVID vaccine's a bit different than that.
Yeah. So, as you probably know, they're called mRNA vaccines. And all mRNA is just a little bit of genetic code that tells your body to produce particular proteins. The body's kind of, all of its inner mechanisms are made of proteins. And the protein that it tells your body to make is called a spike protein, which is something you also may have heard of. Now, on a virus, the spike protein is the kind of weird pointy bits on the outside. They're not actually the inner machinations of, or the inner mechanisms.
The inner mechanisms of my mind
They're not
are an enigma.
They're not the inner mechanisms of the virus at all. They're just the part that allows the virus to attach to your cells and then eventually go into them. Now, because all that's in your body from the vaccine are these bits of spike protein, you're never actually getting sick with the virus. Any sickness that you feel when you receive the vaccine is just your body's immune response to those spike proteins, which are just benign little floating dead things. So it's actually a really cool process that is really new and has allowed us to develop a vaccine at record pace, because we don't have to go into a lab and incubate a ton of this COVID-19 virus and then weaken it all and then start shipping it out. We can just sequence the DNA, put it in the vaccine effectively, and ship it.
Yeah, like the way that I think about it is growing something and then mutating it so that it's safe to be put into someone's body. Like that is a whole process.
It takes time.
But that wasn't really what happened with the COVID vaccine. And I've noticed that there isn't a lot of conversation about that online. Like in a lot of the articles that I read, they don't really talk about that. It's just like a vaccine, and this is a vaccine like we haven't had before. It's a much safer version of a vaccine, and it also was created in a way that it could be, executed in a really fast way. Like,
and there are definitely some other more process-oriented changes that were made while the vaccine was being deployed. For example, generally human trials, we'll use a very small number of humans, and we increase it gradually as the months go on. But what ended up happening this time is, as soon as we saw the first couple people seemed okay, we immediately started scaling up. And those trial periods actually overlapped with one another. So instead of waiting for trial A to finish and then starting B and then starting C, we did a little bit of A and then we started B and then a little bit of B and we started C. And they were all happening at the same time because COVID was such a pain in the butt that we needed to figure out quickly. So there were both technology changes that allowed the vaccine to roll out really, really quickly, and also some process changes that were made as an exception to try and get the vaccine out faster.
Yeah. So then the vaccine passport happened.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of changed the way people are feeling about it, and honestly, understandably. It's like a whole other ballgame when it comes to vaccines, and I think people were just like starting to get used to the idea of like, we are moving out of COVID. To do this, we need vaccinations. And I think we were all kind of told that once we reached, in New Brunswick, I think it was 70% of our population, once we were vaccinated, things started to get easier in terms of we didn't have to wear masks. We were able to like gather again. And then now we're kind of like, it does sort of feel like things are changing. Like we did what we were told and now things are different. But the trouble with COVID is that it's also changing. Like it is evolving. It's a living thing. And it's like, you guys are thinking, but I'm thinking too. And it's
actual thoughts of a virus.
Actual thoughts of COVID. And it's trying to evolve to win. It wants to, it's a cruel organism, but it is trying to beat us at our own game, and it's pretty effective in doing so. And that's why COVID is so scary. Like, I think it's sometimes hard for me to like wrap my head around the fact that this isn't just a flu bug, it is a global pandemic. It has killed millions of people in a matter of months.
4.5.
4.5 million people have died, and that's why people get angry. I think that is why people who are on the pro-vaccination side of things, people who are working in healthcare, people who are dealing with populations that are at risk, that's why people get angry, and that's why I think this is such an emotionally charged conversation, because you never really know when you're speaking to someone if they've lost someone to COVID, if they themselves have had COVID and they're still experiencing, symptoms that are lingering. My sister got COVID. I'm outing her there, but yeah, she got COVID, and it was a really uncomfortable experience for her. And she eventually went on to get vaccinated. My entire family is vaccinated. But I think one of the things that we always forget to talk about is that COVID is trying to beat us at this horrible game that we're playing. Yeah. And it's important that we try to be vaccinated as a population so that herd immunity can help us.
Yeah, because it's even more important now with the Delta variant, that we try and get that immunity ratio as high as possible, because the ratios are tied to how effective the vaccine is at preventing you from getting affected and how infectious the disease is. Yeah. So as the infection rate gets higher and higher, or as the ease of infection gets higher and higher, that number, that 80%, has to be even higher to counteract that. And that's not something that's coming out in the official documentation yet, but it is something that I have definitely seen a lot of people speculating will be changed very soon.
Just the expert on herd immunity over here.
Sorry.
But essentially what's happening is that, every person who, as many people as are vaccinated, there's still people who choose to be unvaccinated, and that is their prerogative. I mean, the statistics and the scientists, they know that there are going to be people who choose not to get vaccinated, and we have accounted for this. The problem is that as more people choose to not be vaccinated, it allows opportunity for COVID, the smart little virus that it is, to come in, infiltrate, and learn how to be smarter. And then the things that we're doing currently to try to help us get back to normal, to make sure that our communities are safe, they're less effective.
We're giving it more time to evolve.
Yeah. So I think that's why a lot of people who are pro-vaccination have a hard time understanding the people who have chosen not to get vaccinated. And there are 100 reasons why, someone might choose not to be vaccinated. We've had a few people message us and talk to us about why they've chosen personally not to be vaccinated, or some of the things that have, been influencing them and their families to be nervous about the vaccination, and the passports as well, because that's like a whole other topic. Yeah. Do you want to talk about our feelings about the passports?
Sure.
I feel like, honestly, at this point, the passports are more controversial than the vaccines themselves.
Yeah, I think so too, because it starts to stem into this idea of, is it a right or a freedom?
Yeah.
Is it infringing on those rights and freedoms? So let's talk about how we feel.
Yeah, and I think to begin, we are pro passport.
Yes, I very much so.
Yeah, we're pro-passport. We thought a lot about this, and I think that is our official statement. We are pro-passport. However, I do understand, and I really do empathize with the people who are against it, and I can really put myself in their shoes and understand why. Because we are coming out of a really crappy year. A lot has happened. I feel like most Canadians, ourselves included, have been disappointed with how the government has handled not only COVID, but just a bunch of other things. I've said this before, and the people who follow me on my personal Instagram know that I'm constantly talking about this, but I just feel like, as it stands in our country right now, poverty isn't decreasing, it's increasing. the wage gap is horrible. And when I talk about wage gap, I'm talking about how the minimum wage in New Brunswick especially, it's like $11.75, and our cost of living just keeps on rising. Like, we saw a 30% rise in the cost of owning a home in New Brunswick in the last, like, what was it, 8 months or so. People can't keep up, and it's not fair. Like, people aren't able to sustain themselves on $11.75, and when we lived in Toronto, the minimum wage was $15 an hour, and it wasn't enough there either. People deserve to make a living wage, and they aren't. And so on top of that, we have healthcare systems that are struggling under... Hello, Sunny. She's like, guys, this is a boring conversation. People who are struggling, just put her away. People who are struggling to make ends meet, they're disappointed with their government. The healthcare system, it's doing the best it can, but it's not enough. And they're like, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. And then there's a global pandemic on top of it. So, like, things ultimately are not great. And then suddenly we are now being forced as Canadians into a federal election, which is just like, it just adds to the fear, like the extreme feelings, and I think the inability to have like non-emotional conversations with people whose views don't align with yours.
It is very reasonable to be emotionally charged right now.
Yeah, because things like they're not that great. So I think, first off, we are pro passport, but we understand why people aren't. And this is my personal opinion, but I understand, and I think that they are necessary only as a way to keep our community safe, and so that we don't regress COVID being smart and figuring out how to get better at what it does, which is kill people. I don't think that they are perfect in the way that they are being rolled out. And I also think it's very strange that I thought this actually the whole pandemic. I think it's strange that different provinces have different rules, because at the end of the day, we're all Canadians. And I think it's strange that depending on what province you live in, you have access to different things. There are different sets of rules. And yeah, I feel like that might be kind of like a weird thought to have, but I do think that the rollout of the passport could be better, and the rules that are involved with the passport, if that makes sense.
I think the main things that we've been hearing are people saying that it's an infringement on their rights.
Yeah.
Whenever they're told it should be. I'm not sure how to go about this.
See, like, this is the thing. Like, we have done a lot of research on this, and it's still a tricky topic to have. Like, it's still a tricky conversation to have.
I think what a lot of people are feeling is that their rights and freedoms are being eroded by being denied access to places based off of what is a voluntary decision.
Yeah.
And it is a voluntary decision. You can elect to get vaccinated or not, but it feels kind of extortionist. And while I don't personally think it is extortion, I can understand the sentiment that others believe that. The way that I perceive it is it's just a measure to do what we were planning to do right at the beginning of COVID, is flatten the curve, or in this case, try to eliminate a fourth or a fifth or whichever wave your community is on now. We're just trying to eliminate that resurgence.
We're trying to minimize risk, and we're also trying to allow for the least amount of human loss possible. Yeah. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, that people are dying, and it's not just people who have COVID that are dying. It's also, people who need important surgeries, they're dying. Mm-hmm. Like, when you think about it in that sense, I think it becomes more clear as to why the government is taking this route. And I think we have all experienced in the last year and a bit that we have been only allowed to access essential services, and for those people who have chosen not to get vaccinated, that's that is going to be their reality, because it's important for the reasons that we have talked about, that people who aren't taking the precautions that are available to them to stop the spread of COVID, they are not in places where there is a lot of gathering. Like I think of a restaurant, or like a bar. That's a place where there's a lot of people coming and going. There's potentially like sharing food, sharing drink. It's like a jovial place. I mean, it's a nice place to be after, the time that we've all had. And if you aren't vaccinated, then potentially you are carrying the virus, and you are more at risk to get COVID, to experience COVID, the full shebang when it comes to COVID. And so I think the reason behind implementing a passport is so that, one, it's to make sure that you are as safe as possible, because you have chosen not to entertain the first thing that could have protected you, in addition to protecting your community from your decision to not be vaccinated. And I say that, and it feels harsh saying it, but I think when I think about it, like, that is the truth. You
are talking about human life, and when you're talking about the preservation of it, there are some hard truths alongside that.
Yeah.
And if you are making a choice if you're making a choice which you think may be beneficial to your longevity or a loved one's longevity by not getting vaccinated, when there is a lot of evidence which would support the contrary, you are making a decision to not participate in what everyone in society, or what a large portion of society is trying to do.
Not just society, but also like society backed by
research and science
and medical professionals.
And if you are the person who is willing to go against that, I do think that there should be some compromises you have to make. And that's our hard take.
Okay, and just so that we're not just like, we're just saying these things and just not showing why we think that's necessary. I had a conversation like earlier today with someone who was kind of asking about why we felt the way that we did.
Thanks for talking with us, by the way.
Yeah, we honestly had a lot of, I don't want to say fun. I feel like that's like too aggressively pleasant, but yeah, it was very interesting. It was
enlightening.
Enlightening would be. Sorry, we got interrupted by a phone call. We really enjoyed the conversations that we had over the last 24 hours, and we just kind of want to provide a little bit of context, or at least I will, because I won't speak for you. But for me, my feelings around the passport and the vaccine really relate to my relationship with my family. My mom is a primary school teacher. She has been for over 25 years, and she is kind of in a strange position right now. So she has been vaccinated. She's fully vaccinated, but she is teaching little people, and people under the age of 12 aren't eligible for a vaccine. And so I've had long conversations with my mother, who is quite frankly terrified of going to work and contracting the Delta variant, because she's teaching little ones who are potentially capable of passing on the virus from parents who have chosen not to be vaccinated. And I think this is just like one example. And I used this example, and I had someone who kind of rebutted and said, how would your mother know whether or not, because kids don't have a vaccine passport. But it just goes to show that like the more people who are vaccinated, the more people who are interested in becoming vaccinated for the sake of their own safety, their family's safety, and their community's safety, the safer everyone is at work, in public places, the more safe they are in schools, the more safe you are in a hospital. And the people who are essential workers will be so thankful, because I know it really makes my mom scared. She's a single parent, and not of me, but of my little brother. And I know it really makes her nervous, the idea contracting a variant that is more deadly than the one that we were dealing with a year ago. And that's kind of why I feel it is necessary for vaccine passports to exist. I mean, we've already personally kind of dealt with them. Going to traveling to PEI for work, I needed to prove that I had been vaccinated. My friend needed to prove that she had at least one vaccine, and she was scheduled for her booster. And, we've been dealing with these kinds of limitations for a long time now. When we first came to New Brunswick, we had to isolate when we first came, and we isolated, I think, 3 times. Mm-hmm. We've done quarantine 3 times so far, and that was what we had to go through for deciding to leave the province that we were currently living in and going to a new one. And that was the price we had to pay when we decided to go back to Ontario and clean out our apartment and make the final move to Ontario. That was the price we paid by going to Ontario for Christmas. We had to quarantine again when we went home. And so we have all had to make sacrifices, but we did them. We knew that we were going to have to quarantine, and we made the decision anyways. And it's kind of, it's similar. It's not the same. I won't compare them, but it is similar to how people who have chosen to not get a vaccine are now having to face the idea of not being able to dine in a restaurant because they don't have proof of vaccination. We've had to make these compromises for over a year and a half now, and this is the continuation of that, because we have not yet found a solution to COVID that works for everyone. We are still actively fighting it, and it will get worse if we don't implement, new ways of trying to protect ourselves and our communities from this virus that doesn't care whether you're vaccinated, whether you're pro-vaxxer or not.
And the vaccines are the best tool we have.
Yeah.
Unless technology comes up with something that's radically different that we've never thought of before, vaccines are our only tool to stop infection before it starts.
Yeah.
Other than that, we're relying on masks and we're relying on social distancing, and we've seen how that's worked out. It's sustainable for very short periods of time, and as soon as those times are over, everything goes back to the way it was with COVID, reinfecting large numbers of people again. So
yeah, and I think
it is our only tool.
I think our other option, as globally, humanity, is to allow COVID to move beyond a pandemic and straight into an endemic. And that happened with chickenpox.
It's happened with a lot of diseases. There are things that if you contract them as a kid now, you're probably going to be okay. You might get sick for a little bit.
And there are people who die from it.
Mm-hmm.
However, COVID is a lot more deadly than those diseases. And so we don't actually know what it would look like if we were to just kind of stop trying in general and just allow COVID to run its course. We don't know.
We have seen what would happen, and we've seen it in places like India is the most recent case.
Yeah.
The hospital systems will get overrun and a lot of people will die. That's it.
So
we've already seen it.
In conclusion, on that note, that is why we feel the way that we do. We are pro-vax. We are pro-vax. We are pro making informed decisions for yourself around the things that you do to and with your body. And that goes beyond just vaccines. And we're pro-vaccination passport. But we don't feel like the people who have chosen differently than us deserve to be ostracized or, called out in such negative ways that they have been online.
It can be frustrating, but it's not the way to deal with differing opinions.
Yeah, and I think that the best way that we kind of move past this as a global community is to do so with empathy and to try to understand that, people aren't making these decisions being like, haha, I'm not going to get the vaccine because I hope, I want other people to be hurt, and they're doing so because they're afraid, and getting angry at them is not the way to make them change their minds.
With all that said, if you do want to talk to us about this at all in either a more scientific sense or a more intersectional sociology kind of side of things, we are more than happy to do that, and we'd be excited to talk to you.
Yeah, that being said, we're not professionals.
No.
And
we'd
be more than happy to send you our Google Doc of like sources. Some are,
we have access to all the same information you do, and that information comes from very intelligent people who are experts.
And if you'd be interested in reading where we got our sources from, we'd be more than happy to send you a Google Drive link to that document so you can do the reading yourself. And other than that, we hope that this was enjoyable, semi-enjoyable, at least provoking. Yeah, so that's kind of how we feel. And I think to like kind of end it off, we just be kind to one another. We've all been through a really tough year, and we're all doing the best that we can. That being said, listen to scientists and be safe.
Look out for one another.
Yeah, look out for one another.
And get vaccinated.
Yeah.